Hey Bob, everybody. Welcome to Questions and Answers Part 3. And my name is Chris Parker. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to this event with Peter Nordeen and Ward Parks. They say the third time is the charm. And it must be because just look at these guys. They're so charming. And more importantly, they are 100% for Mayor Baba. Ward Parks and Peter Nordeen have dedicated their lives in service to beloved Baba. And why are we having them answer questions about Baba? It's due to their years of working under the supervision of Baba's mandali, due to their insights and understanding about Baba's life and ways, due to their remarkable memories and scholarship. These two fellows are eminently qualified to field questions about Mayor Baba's life, his mission, his teachings, his messages to the world. Once again, we have received a very interesting selection of questions, and Ward and Peter are going to start off with a few comments. Before we start, please join me in thanking Peter and Ward for taking their time to share their thoughts and insights with us. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
We've already got a question over here.
Will we ever run out of questions about Mayor Baba?
He says no. In the introduction to Beams on the Spiritual Panorama, which was a booklet published to answer questions after people read God Speaks, he said, if you keep doing this, you must realize that there is no end to the questions. So, okay.
Until you get the real answer.
That's it.
Well, here are some thoughts just initially about what is the point and value in coming to understand Baba and his teachings better, especially in view of the fact that Baba gave such emphasis on love. I've given talks on the subject, but here are some thoughts on that. For people with no interest in it and who just want to remember and love Baba, that is all adequate in itself. There's no doubt about that. But the problem is that many of us have minds. And I don't know about your mind, but my mind jabbers from the moment I wake up until the moment I go to sleep. And it probably goes on doing it while I'm dreaming too. So in view of that fact, what to do about it? But Baba's understandings and also reading about Baba's life helps to create a framework of the mind that is beautifully suited and fitted for learning how to love him. It's the kind of home that the heart would like to have. And I would also say this, that Baba's, I spend a lot of my time studying Baba's teachings and some of the other great world religions also. I have an interest in that. And I found Baba's explanations of things to be really, really beautiful. They are so satisfying, and they're windows to these spectacular vistas all over the place. So they provide a wonderful framework for the integration of the head and the heart. And actually, that is what Baba so often directed his lovers towards. If you have heart only, you can love God yourself, but not be of much help to others. But the integration of head and heart is what is best suited to serve others also. And here's one other point that I'm always, I spend a lot of time the editing of Baba's books, and I'm very, very conscious of this, that at the present time, the world doesn't care about Meher Baba. He's off the radar. But that will change. And when it does, there will be all kinds of questions and attacks on Meher Baba. About 20 years ago, there was this movement, the New Atheists. I don't know if some of you are acquainted with them. Very prominent, vigorous voices attacking God and attacking religion. And I was not at all impressed myself with the substance of what they had to say. I thought these things have been answered by great giants for centuries and millennia, but they were rhetorically extremely effective, and they poured scorn and contempt on people so stupid as to believe in God. And a lot of people lost their faith in God during that period because of those people. And so I feel that when the time comes, it would be a good thing for there to be Baba lovers, those attracted to it, interested in it, who do have a good understanding and who can give good responses for the sake of other Baba lovers. Like, here's a sort of, I always bring up this example, but I'm attacking Meher Baba, and I say, if Meher Baba was infinite intelligence, why couldn't he spell intelligence correctly? He consistently misspelled it in his own handwriting, right? And most Baba lovers are just, I don't care. But somehow the heart has its own way of knowing where questions like this just bounce off. But when the attacks come in a really concerted and strong way, it would be good for there to be people who can speak up. I could say a lot about this myself and give responses. So that is another thing I think worth keeping in mind for the day when the question arises where there are lots of new people coming in, wanting to find out about Baba and needing explanations that satisfy. Okay.
Ditto. I'm just riding the Ward Parks wave here.
We all are. But
Hey, Winnie.
so why couldn't he spell intelligence?
Because, why did he misspell intelligence?
Because it's not important.
Few reasons. It's not important to us, it's important to academics. It's not important to us, we know what he means. Two reasons. One is, though Meher Baba was extremely proficient in English and 6 other languages, reading, speaking, writing, English was not his mother tongue per se. It may have been Persian, may have been Gujarati. Or he may have had multiple mother tongues, if you put it in terms of a human being. However, in those other languages, they are different from English. If you use Devanagari script to write a word, you can write it in several different ways, depending on the pronunciation of the dialect. It's the same word that has the same meaning, but it might be written in a few different ways. The English language, not as bad as French, but it has evolved and devolved in certain ways. Ward knows this very well, through the centuries. And so many sounds have become silent. George Bernard Shaw was a big proponent on fixing the English language so that it would be accurate per alphabet. But many of the other Mandali had the same habit because they would write with that habit of transliteration of sound, into the alphabet. There's another big reason, and that is because the avatar is very impatient. He's got a lot to do in a short amount of time, and he's not concerned about those things. Just gets the point across. You see, in God's hand, it's one. We refer to this from time to time. Ward did this book with Marwan. It's 30-some pages, incredible content. But this is where you find words and crosses out, and sometimes an arrow in a circle, and some odd thing is going on. What is this? He's communicating by writing in that 17-month period, and that's what we see there. So we really don't care what the academic world will say and judge.
If I had my PowerPoint slides, this is part of an answer that I give when I'm getting into God speaksy types of explanations. The 10th state of God has a representation of the perfect master and the avatar. And it has 7 concentric circles. There's gross body, subtle body, mental body. I've forgotten what all of them are. There's universal mind there, universal divine ego, infinite consciousness. And the thing is that we have a very kind of simplified idea of what the avatar is. God become man. Good. It's good enough for most purposes. But we don't really know what that means. And the full descent of that avataric consciousness into a human form undoubtedly means all kinds of different levels and depths of engagement going on all the time. So one of the circles constituting the identity of Meher Baba, if you want to look at that chart as a portrait of Meher Baba, would be his mental body. There's also a physical body. You might say, well, why was Meher Baba 5'5"? He was so big, he should have been 7'2". Or you could ask also, why did he have this specific attribute or not? And if he was all powerful, why couldn't he lift up a Mack truck? You know, all these sorts of things. Well, because there's an engagement with a specificity of things entailed in becoming the avatar. For him to do his work, he has to take on particular specific limitations of not this or not that. So in that mental body of Merwan Shariar Irani, he spelled intelligence I-N-T-E-L-E-G-E-N-C-E. Now, if he had called upon his universal body, I fully believe he could have accessed a nice Webster's there and spelled it I-N-T-E-L-L-I-G-E-N-C-E. Baba has said as much, actually, that when there was a need, that was there, but it did not suit the purposes of his work always to be at that level. He would function out of whatever point in that identity was suited to the avataric work that he was doing. In the future, this question will come up a lot. And this will be one of the attacks on Meher Baba. I brought this sort of a stupid example, but if Meher Baba was omniscient, why did he get this wrong, or why did he get that wrong? These questions already get asked about, Jesus, say, all the time. There will be great saints with profound understanding who will speak to this in the future. So we can get an early run at it right now.
It seems to me that the avatar would not be a subject to any rule. Everything is subject to him, including the rules of grammar. If he wants,
Oh, now you're going too far.
if he wants to,
Hey, you're talking to an English professor here.
maybe that's what we need to get rid of these minds.
Or you could ask another question, like in God's Hand, you can see it. If he was perfect knowledge, why did he have to cross out? Why didn't he get it right the first time? But it's sort of like a stupid question in a way, but people will say this in the future. Well, this is part of what being a man is.
Yeah, but that is also a question of context, because remember, this was a discourse being delivered on paper with pencil, not a manuscript per se of a discourse. He was communicating by writing. And oftentimes he would do this with the board. We know we have examples of that when he wrote on the board during those years. He would X things out, put arrows and circles, and give me another board and redo things. So context is also part of that issue with those.
There's a great story. We're just riffing on this. I hope it's all right. But that Erich told, I'm sure some of you may have heard of it. Maybe some of you hadn't. I actually wrote out a full article, and I think I published it in Tavern Talk from Merwan. But it was, I think in the last few months of Baba's life, Erich had a huge stack of letters he had to answer. And he had gone back into his room and was answering them. And he wanted to get done to send it out to the mail in time. And Goher shows up at the door. And maybe somebody will remember the Hindi phrase. I always forget it. But she said, Baba has a message for you. And so Erich sat right up on his bed and put everything down and listened. And it was a phrase that translates, seeming to know nothing, know that I know everything. Does anybody happen to know the Hindi?
And it was in Gujarati, but I don't remember it.
I think it was Hindi.
Yeah.
It was unusual because Merwan said that. And Erich said, tell Baba I've listened to it. Well, 10 minutes later, there's a knock on his door and it's Goher. And she says, Baba has a message for you. And Erich sits up again. Seeming to know nothing, know that I know everything. And Erich says, Yes, tell Baba I've heard what he said. Well, 15 minutes later, there's another knock at the door. And once again, it's a Gohair. And Gohair is saying, Baba has another message for you. And it was the same exact, you see this trait of Baba's? And I'm sure when Gohair went back, Baba might have said, did he listen to what I say? Are you sure he heard it? Go tell him again, because Baba would do this. So if he knows everything, doesn't he know that Erich heard what he said? So, seeming to know nothing, know that I know everything. And so Erich, I'm sure in frustration, got up in his bed, took a pen, and wrote it on the wall.
He wrote it in Gujarati, but it's Hindi.
In Hindi, yeah. And
It's still there.
And so look at
Still there.
the method that this is my interpretation, that Baba uses to get that message. It's on the Monash cabin wall forever, as long as that place lasts. And people will say, well, what is this? And there's this beautiful story. And Baba's using this trait where I'm sure he was saying, did he really listen? Are you sure he paid attention? Like that. And he uses this method to get it up on the walls. I think it's a beautiful example of how Baba would use seeming ignorance as a method of getting his message to humanity. I think it's a beautiful story. Especially, I'm sure Erich was just getting really irritated, but instead of expressing irritation, he got up and wrote it on the wall.
What is truth with a capital T? Because in the Master's Prayer it says, you are the Trinity of truth, knowledge, and bliss. You are the source of truth. So what is truth? And how is it different from knowledge, for example?
This particular phrase from the Universal Prayers, the English rendering, truth, knowledge, and bliss, of Sat Chitanand, Satchitanand. Sat, it's actually derived from the Sanskrit verb astitva, which means to be. So you could actually translate it as existence. That would probably be a closer translation. So existence, knowledge, and bliss. So I would say truth and existence are the same thing. What is truth? Truth is that which is, right? If it's true, it is. Wouldn't that be true? So I think it's God's nature as existence.
It doesn't need to be created. It's beyond creation. It's beyond creation. And it doesn't ever have an end. So it is that which always exists. That means oneness. There is a oneness that has eternal nature.
In fact, the existence of God is that by virtue of which we exist. It's the existence in us. It's the existence in everything. And I'm just going to flip it on this point out too. It's just my own personal opinion. But we often talk about the Master's Prayer. I have to really do an in-depth research into this, but I do believe it was originally called the Universal Prayer. And it got published in the West under the name the Master's Prayer, and Baba never corrected it. But Flag Chris, who was converting me to this opinion, and he converted me successfully, said that in those days, the 1950s, it's Baba, it's the Master's Prayer, because it was kind of, I don't know, theosophical, Vedantic, the master this, the master that. So they would use that phrase, and it just got published as such. And Baba never complained, so, I mean, it's a reasonable name. But I personally feel the Universal Prayer is a better name for it, because there are a lot of people who don't like the idea of a master. Now, if Baba had brought it up himself, that's the end of the question. But actually, the prayer doesn't talk about that. There's only one possible allusion to God incarnate, and that is the highest of the high. But every other term is on God in some manifestation. So I think it would be better for the universal dissemination of the prayer to call it the Universal Prayer. It's just my opinion.
This is a Meherabad question. In old pictures of Meher Baba at the Duni in Meherabad, there is a roof over the Dooney. But we all know now that there is no roof over the Dooney. So when was the roof built and how long was it in place? And another question is, when was the Samadhi painted white? So I guess in the old pictures it must be
Right.
some other color.
We'll start with the Dooney. Of course, you know, the origin of the Dooney was that it was first lit on November 10th, 1925. The table cabin was already in place when the Dooney was lit then, that first time. That table cabin was placed beneath the neem tree near the Dooney that still exists today. So that his table cabin could be in the shade of the neem tree. The table cabin's primary use in those days was one of the important positions to write the book, but also his seat to greet people who came to Mehrabad. So that Dooney, at that point, was just before, in front of, the table cabin. That position was 8 to 9 feet slightly northwest of the present position of the Dooney pit. It was changed when that platform was built. And as you recall, Baba began relighting the Dooney in 1941 in December. He was doing more seclusion on the hill then, and 4 people came down, 4 of the Mandali came with him. He actually kept a sheet over his head to come to the Dooney because he was in seclusion, but it was part of his seclusion work. He was keeping seclusion in the tomb building at the time, the new tomb building. That was December 12th. Then Upasni Maharaj dropped his body on the 24th. Then the following January 12th, the Dooney was lit again. On December 12th, Baba had Gustaji light the Dooney. On January 12th, he had Papa Jesawala light the Dooney, but he was out of seclusion by that time. But it was January 12th, 1942, when Baba directed that the Dooney at Mehrabad should always be lit on the 12th of the month. Not going to go into it, but when Baba began the Dooney at Mehrabad, it was not a casual thing. He instilled the authority of a wali into the Dooney. 5th plane. People were supposed to make use of the Dooney to rid themselves of weaknesses. And he warned people not to play with the Dooney. Now today you have people who go with this, there's a rumor that if you go to the Dooney 5 times for a wish and you'll get it fulfilled. That's dangerous. You're asking for trouble. Go ahead, it's good. Have the trouble. Anyway, so this started in 42 again, every 12th. In the early years, they associated lighting the Dooney in the 20s with rain, because when Baba would have the Dooney lit, it would rain, especially after some period when it wasn't lit. He would relight it. On the first couple anniversaries of the Dooney, it was relit, and there would be a big rain. On the second anniversary of the Dooney, it rained for 3 days, and the villagers, instead of coming to beg Baba for water, came to beg him, please stop the rain. That's how bad it was. Anyway, digressing. There was a point when that platform and the covering over it was built. Because obviously in monsoon season, it would be problematic to have fire and rain. Yet they would do it, they would rig up some kind of a cover if that happened. But the intention of the Mandali was always to do something better for Baba, make something nice, wouldn't be good. Now it was either 1948, when the main bungalow was built, and there were some materials left over, that was also done, or it was in 1952, after the Mononash period at Mehrabad. Why do I say that? Because there were the 2 cabins on the hill at Mehrabad. And if you recall, in December of 51, Baba had Padri come and dismantle the 2 cabins on the hill. The foundations are still there, but the cabins were dismantled and all the material was brought down, and there was one Mononash cabin built for Baba to finish his Mononash work, which is the one that Erich was assigned to live in for the rest of his life, there at Marzat. That pit was just to the side of that and has long since been buried. It was the Mananash Duni right there. So that's another Marzat Duni which was separate and only had significance for Mananash. But there was all this material left over because 2 larger cabins were dismantled on the hill. All that material was brought down into the open area that we see in front of Mondley Hall. And all that material was used, the select materials were used to build the Mananash cabin of Erich's. Some of that material came to Mehrabad, I know for sure, because there was an extension built onto the engine room of the lesser quality materials that Padre used to make a larger engine room so he could store materials and supplies in there. Had nothing else at Mehrabad. So he made use of that. So either in 1948 or 1952, and I believe it was 1948, this is something, you know, and all the time I spent with Padre, this is a question I never asked him. We just took these things for granted. It was casual conversation. But now, if we could go back, the questions we would ask. But, digressing a bit here, these questions always arise after years of contemplating all these things. And so questions come up and come up. This is one of the things. I never nailed that down specifically. We may find out sometime. But we know it was built by that point. So that platform was built, the Duni pit was actually moved to the southeast about 8 or 9 feet, and that covering was made on it. By 1960, the Public Works Department had sent them an order that this building is too close to the road. You're going to have to demolish the cover. So the materials from the top of that building were dismantled. And at that same period, in 1960, the new covering over the Jopati was built. You recall now, if you see pictures of Baba giving people the tour of Lower Mehrabad in 1954 during the 3 Incredible Weeks, you see the original old roof and structure around the Jopati. By the 60s, it was different. And we have photographs from that time. So that new roof you see on the Jopati with the new nicely planed teak timbers was done during that period. And those may have come from the covering over the Duni platform because nothing was wasted with the Mandali. It was all recycled for better purpose. Now there was a dilemma because the table cabin was kept on the Duni platform. Once that new covering was built, the first place the table cabin ended up was the back side of the Jopati veranda there, where Baba's bathing room was in the original old days. Then Duncan got involved in it. He reconditioned the table house, preserved it, and they built a new covering over it, which is what you see today. The tomb shrine, which is now the Samadhi, was whitewashed at a certain point in the early days. The purpose of that, not quite sure who did it, who ordered it, but the purpose was to make it less hot inside. So that if Baba wanted to use it, it wouldn't be stifling hot. Baba didn't like it. After Baba dropped the body, they took the whitewash off. He was never going to use it again, obviously. They took the whitewash off and left it in the original condition. So that's what we see today. When the meditation cabins and the platform to the east were removed, the whitewash was also done at that point.
Baba said that consciousness is fully formed in the human being. So if a person says that they are more conscious of something, is that a misnomer? They may be more aware, but they're already conscious and their consciousness is already formed. So I guess the question might be asked, what is the difference between consciousness, awareness, knowledge, and wisdom?
Yeah, I've brooded a lot on this broader topic. Consciousness is very central to Meher Baba's darshana. I'm using that word. God speaks is centrally focused on the matter of consciousness, and Baba does very clearly say that on the achievement of human form, consciousness is complete. So there is really no change in consciousness itself thereafter. The question is, what are you conscious of? So for those of you pitiable souls like myself who are not yet God realized, we are conscious of illusion. But the problem does not lie in the consciousness. The problem lies in its being invested in illusion. And when you get God realized, the consciousness remains exactly the same. In this respect, Baba's explanations are very much related to Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta focuses on this definition of God as Satchitanand. We mentioned that earlier. Sat is truth, from astitva, which is to be, and chit means consciousness. And in Advaita Vedanta, chit or consciousness is identical to the Atma or soul. So I've puzzled on this for a long time, and I won't go over all of it. It's quite involved, but the term that Baba did use relating to that, it seems to me, is knowledge with a capital K. The real trinity that Baba adverted to, really from the beginning to the end, is knowledge, power, and bliss. That's the most important trinity of that type. And it's the foundation for the mental sphere, the subtle sphere, and the gross sphere, right? The mental sphere is the shadow of knowledge, the subtle sphere is the shadow of power, and the gross sphere is the shadow of bliss. Shadow means happiness and misery there. So it seems to me that knowledge is really Baba's key God term, and consciousness he uses as a scene of difference, where God is originally unconscious, gathers consciousness through evolution, and divests itself of ignorance through the involutionary process and the realization of God. So these are important terms for Baba's. And also I'll throw in another term which does come up in God Speaks, and that is gnosis, Gnosis. And I do think that this is valuable because we conventionally use knowledge for what is intellectual knowledge. Like that's what someone like me would have. I don't have any real... Whereas the gnosis could be applied to someone on the planes of consciousness who has direct experience of the inner realms. This is a word used in God Speaks and elsewhere, so I think it's useful. And if you give gnosis a capital G, it means a God realization. And I would take wisdom to be the kind of knowledge that ordinary people can have that has been distilled through experience to a deeper appreciation of truth with the aid of intuition, so that that limited knowledge is very acutely and truthfully directed to points of truth within the experience of life. Wisdom is not the same thing as God realization, but it seems to me that it's very helpful in all respects, including on the path toward that. So that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're limited to definition, denotation, connotation of words, communicating in words and all that. Awareness is, let's say for an example, Ward Parks goes to the jungle and he sees a guy in the jungle who doesn't know these things. They both have human consciousness. But this guy didn't go to Harvard in the jungle. On the other hand, Ward Parks doesn't know what is this stuff here? And that guy in the jungle can say, well, this plant is for this, and this plant and this does that, and these animals, and all that. There's a different awareness, consciousness.
What's that big yellow and black stripe thing that's snarling at me?
So, the awareness in a state of consciousness can be different. Knowledge with a capital K, we've already gone over that. Knowledge with a small k is knowledge of a topic, a subject that's studied. Wisdom is a general, as the word said. It comes through experience mostly. It's a higher general common sense that comes with intellectual conviction.
Kitty was very interested in consciousness and awareness, and for a couple of years, every time I went to see her, she would ask me that. And I always wondered if I wish I had asked her, was there something Baba said that provoked that question in her? I always had the feeling there was. But a term Baba did use was Chaitanya. And he used that a lot. I'm sure those of you who have studied and memorized infinite intelligence will have be well acquainted.
What did he say about Chaitanya? What was that one?
It's a very useful term. So Baba says that in the upper animal kingdoms, Chaitanya takes the form of instinct. In ordinary human consciousness, gross consciousness, it takes the form of intellect. In the subtle planes, it takes the form of inspiration. In the mental planes, it takes the form of illumination. So I would think of Chaitanya as consciousness qualitatively modified by the state in which it is in, something like that.
So Baba has defined it this way: Chaitanya is thinking, the mind. But obviously there's no mind in, let's say, the stone form. It's not developed yet. So what he says is consciousness and Chaitanya are identical at the very beginning,
Right.
and then at God realization. But they're absolutely different on the path between. They diverge, and their consciousness and Chaitanya are different. Because Chaitanya is the mind thinking, projecting, going through experiences. But we'll get into Chaitanya again in another question, I think. But
It's a big term, and Baba, after the Westerners showed up, Baba changed the way he explained things on many topics, and this is one of the terms he more or less dropped.
it was difficult for Westerners to catch a lot of this, what would you call it, nomenclature of Vedanta.
Yeah.
And Vedanta has a lot of things in it. In the West, mostly people were conditioned to a Eurocentric Christian agenda in academics from centuries, which conditioned things a lot. And they lost a lot of very early stuff, ignored the Eastern religions. And it all has to do with religious politics, unfortunately. But in the Western in Christianity and Islam, they became more esoteric and less available to greater numbers of people as the centuries went by.
I think someone, maybe Tony, had asked the question about the difference between some of these early books, Tiffin Lectures, wasn't that your question? Infinite Intelligence, Creation, and the God Speaks. And we could come back to that. But the key reason for the difference was that Baba went to the West, and he very much changed his way of explaining things, and he dropped a lot of the content that was really intelligible to Indians but would not be to his... so he globalized his message, so to speak. In the short term, it's really not fair to the West to say this, but being West to say it anyway, he dumbed it down a lot at first. Although it's not that the Westerners were dumb, but the spirituality at that time was very shallow.
Frame of reference was just not.
Yeah. But then Baba did gradually build it up again over the years. So by God Speaks, you get a very sophisticated and very developed account. Right now, Western colonialism is very much out of fashion, but being an English professor, in the domain of language, I say, do it, be a colonialist. In other words, we should use these words from Indic and Arabic and heck, from Chinese. They've got some good words too, because those words are very, very expressive. And some of Baba's early vocabulary he dropped and never picked up again, but it's to be found in his early discourses.
We know what Baba said about suicide, the problem of suicide and how bad it was for an individual. Now we've got assisted suicide. Do you think that there's any significant difference, any spiritual difference between suicide and assisted suicide?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You want to start on it?
Okay, I'm not, there are some people who would be extremely knowledgeable through their professions about this, and of course I'm not. I'm very leery of one's going down that road. Baba really did warn against it. In fact, in all of the world religions, it's regarded as the worst thing you can possibly do. The best account that I know of is from Listen Humanity, and on page 99, Baba does list 4 grades of suicide: lowest, low, high, and highest. And there is, in fact, a kind of suicide practiced by highly advanced souls that is not binding at all. It can lead to liberation. But the lowest is like if you, okay, I'll just read a teeny bit. Thus, one who has committed murder for lust or power may commit suicide when he is caught. And after leaving the body, you become a ghost. And you can be caught in that state for centuries. You don't even get to experience the hell state until you've completed the vicarious, miserable vicarious spending of your sanskaras through other people. You know, you find someone who you can possess, or, you know, and then you can get rid of it. And once that's done, then you get to have the hell state. Ha! So it's a drag. So
Worse than hell.
yeah, it's worse than hell. So, I mean, generally it seems to me to be an extremely bad idea. So I don't know about assisted suicides specifically.
That's concerning suicides of people who are really selfish and really trying to avoid the consequences of their action. And they want to get a way out of that.
But my understanding is that even people, okay, maybe I should just keep quiet because I don't really know, but I would really think it's a bad idea. So.
Generally it is a bad idea. Why? So we'll go into that. The next category is bad. And these people may not necessarily seem like they're bad people. They're just fed up, or they're disgusted with life, or they have a disease they just want to get rid of. Now, what the masters explain is that suffering to death is a great opportunity to lose sanskaras. Upasni Maharaj, for an example, said, if one finds out that they are dying of a fatal disease, the best thing is stop eating, just drink water and wait. Suffer it out and wait. It won't be long. And remember God. It's a great opportunity. The problem is, in modern society, the attitude is that this is real. I should not suffer in any way whatsoever. So therefore, eliminating that suffering is of highest importance. It's a false paradigm that we are our bodies and we should only experience what we call good feelings. Okay. But if you know the law of karma and reincarnation, you know that that's not the case. Yes?
I'm just thinking about people who commit suicide who have suffered for years and years from depression or mental illness or
Yes.
something.
So, well, Baba has given these 4 basic categories. The law of karma functions totally by motive. Remember that. And people who suffer severely from mental illness, they are not really absolutely responsible for their own conditions. We have friends who have committed suicide because of mental illness. We don't fault them for that. We can tell you there are several people who Baba placed their names on the memorial tower who died of suicide for different reasons. Some of them his close disciples. They're not doomed for centuries and all that. What he says about the state of a bad suicide is they don't go through this disembodied attachment to the gross world like the really bad, the worst cases are. They go directly to the hell state, and depending on their motive, determines that hell state. So if they're really helpless and out of control and just desperate, they're not going to experience a severe hell state. And remember, in the 12 ways of realizing me, if you have the desperation that one has to realize God, that one would commit suicide, you will realize me. We're not saying that you do that through suicide, but that feeling is there. So people suffer. Now, the other thing to remember is it's one lifetime. So this whole question about the course of the existence of the soul is a big thing. It's basically lost in the Western world, and in the world at large, not just the Western world. 8,400,000 is a big number. It's a huge number. And we've gone over this before. A couple of years ago, I sent Ward an email. You know, I've been thinking, Ward, you know, in God Speaks, it says 8,400,000. I know you have the capacity to tell me how many words are in God Speaks. Can you tell me how many letters are in God Speaks? He says, you know, I just got that new technology and I can tell you not the words and the spaces. Not just the, I can tell you the letters and, I can tell you the letters and the spaces. So he said, and it adds up to this. So if we divide 8,400,000 by that number of letters and spaces in God Speaks, it's still about 17 times short. So that means, let's say you take the title, I use this analogy from time. If you take the title God in God Speaks and take the O and cut that in half, quarter, eighths, sixteenths, 1/16 of that O in God Speaks still doesn't quite represent one lifetime in the course of human reincarnation. And you're being told in this book that you're going to reincarnate in human existence that many times. That gives you an impact of the astronomical number 8,400,000 is. So that's the thing to keep in mind. It's another reason why the masters never, it's all of no great consequence generally to them, these kind of things. They just go on and on with it because the world is doing this constantly. We've all done suicides many times, no doubt. We would never be here if we hadn't. So.
What about suicide of the brave?
Oh, there is a higher
those are
suicide.
the higher kinds.
The higher suicide is, as Baba said, is go ahead and read it, Ward.
The third or high type of suicide is in no way rooted in inferior motives and is therefore free of their deteriorating effects. It is inspired by altruistic motives and it's a sacrifice made to secure the material or spiritual well-being of others. One who meets death through, e.g., a hunger strike in order to better the welfare of the masses. This is the days of Mahatma Gandhi, of course, when that was well known by everybody, is a suicide of this high type. The motives of such a suicide are not far different from those of martyrs who laid down their lives on the battlefield for the country, society, or religion. The total absence of base motives, which is what Peter was talking about, the motive matters so much. In this high type of suicide makes it entirely different from the lower grades, as in other noble acts of self-effacement. Such highly motivated action entitles the departed individual to the privileges and pleasures of the heavenly state. It also constitutes a definite asset in his spiritual ongoing. And there's a higher kind still, where the fourth or highest class results from intense desire to see God or to unite with Him. This is an extremely rare occurrence in most cases in which suicide is believed to have been committed for the sake of God. There's a mixture of various other faces, but when it's not, you get mukti, liberation.
Yes. You suggested in earlier comments about suicide, as I understood it, that this passive approach, that is, I decide to stop eating and stop drinking and let life slip away, is somehow okay. What would you say about
These
that?
are the words of Upasani Maharaj. He didn't say stop drinking, but he said stop eating.
Okay.
But Upas means fasting, and Upasani Maharaj got the name because twice in his life he fasted for over a year and didn't die. And the first time he was attempting to just starve to death because he was had so much desperation. Instead he got God realization through Sai Baba. His story, as you know, it's a unique story. It's a story of somebody who really suffered for the goal. Well, we talked about the very high suicides are the yogis, Baba said. And that they're in tune with the divine plan. It's not an individual choice per se. They know what their work and service is, and when it's done, They just stop their bodies. It's not.
Yeah, Baba said that some advanced souls can just take off their bodies like taking off a coat. I guess you could call that suicide. Doesn't sound like it.
And Baba has made the statement, there is no great difference for someone who's mentally conscious when they drop their physical body. There's no great difference in their state. They're already there. They're just like, okay, done with that thing. It's nothing much for them.
Baba often talks about grace of the Master. So the question is grace sort of a get out of my karma free card? And so that's if you have that grace from the Master. And then the question goes on, if grace is a manipulation of the laws of karma done by the avatar or perfect master, is it then like a grace lottery that we can hope to win? So then if the law of karma and grace work together, what do we need to do to win this grace?
Yes, Baba would say win my grace, but he would say earn my grace. Earn my grace. And it's done by living the life of right action, right inaction, and longing, and patience. People would come to Baba sometimes, and they would think they're very clever. Yes, you say you are God. I believe that could be possible, but you could prove it to me by giving me realization. and Baba would say, oh, you're very clever. Very clever. See, all these people have been around me for years. I don't give them realization yet. Look at Gustaji. In his past lives, he earned this right to be starved by Sai Baba, to be beaten by Upasani Maharaj. He was sent to me, and I sent him to Babajan, where she would not let him sleep, but made him her servant. And yet here he is lingering with me. Why should I give you that and not somebody else? So people would have to shut up. They're not. Why are they worthy of it? It could be occasionally that a person is in the right position. It's not realization that they get, though. It's liberation. It's a different issue. Any number of souls could be liberated. When it comes to realization, it's a different issue. There is a quota. And it's an interesting thing in 1927 when the subject of Mahatma Gandhi was being discussed because of newspaper articles. Baba at that point mentioned, and I don't remember off the top of my head the numbers, but Baba mentioned that among the souls of ordinary consciousness, Gandhi was the best. He was the most, qualified? And he will, Baba said, he will be one of those 300 that receive God realization in the next 170 years. It says something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. So I calculated, what's the rate?
3 a year.
What's the rate?
2 a year.
It's, let's say, about every 5.5 months, somebody's getting God realization. Well, that's pretty good.
That was then, Peter.
Well, if that's the rate in this age, that's quite good. There aren't that many people who earn the right for God realization. As I say, liberation is a different issue, and we know of many people around Baba who are close to Baba, or he's in your last lifetime. You won't be coming back. Or you've got one more, that's it. So it's not accidental, it's not random that people gravitate or end up coming into the orbit of the avatar. It's not like that. It takes many, many long lifetimes.
I have a question connected with that, and it comes out of Buddhism, the idea of a bodhisattva who refuses to be enlightened or whatever until all...
That's bogus.
It is.
There's only one bodhisattva, and he's already realized.
Yeah.
He's the original ancient one. Nobody does that. That means that they could be, they're not realized, but they're in charge of a divine plan? No, it's not true.
No, I don't know that at probably a certain state you could, like at the time of the transference, you're dropping your body and you're entering another body, you could choose to enter another body.
Bobbitt did say things to me that I've never believed that could be true, literally true either, but what it does seem to represent in Mahayana Buddhism is a reorientation from the ideal of simply achieving nirvana yourself to the idea of service to others. And Baba did say that peers on the sixth plane of consciousness sometimes know that they could get, I don't know if it's mukti or realization, but they actually don't want it because they don't want to lose consciousness of the world, and they want to find a master who can do that for them. And there's another place in Infinite Intelligence where Baba, it's not where they're being reincarnated time after time after time. It's just a particular very advanced state where certain souls don't want to enter into the realization state, but want to serve others instead. That makes me think of the Bodhisattva ideal. But in the question of grace, let me just flip this in too. Another great word, I love it, which came up in Creationist Causes for grace. And I never saw it before, but I've seen it since. Hooky, the hooky. Baba says, if I get the, isn't that a great word? Hooky. Makes me think of like H-U-K-K-I. Makes me think of like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer playing hooky. If I get the hooky, but Baba said, but it's very hard to get the hooky. And the hooky there seems to refer to the act of the master in giving grace. And the thing I've thought about a little and haven't really meditated through, okay, I'll say this, it does seem one of the understandings to come from the idea of grace is that you can't achieve God realization on your own. It really does take the act of a master, a perfect master, a Jivan Mukta can do it, to run, or the avatar. And also the idea of grace, I'm sort of puzzling on this, makes me think of, it seems related to whim, sort of like the whim of the master. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between grace and the whim in some way. Also, I tend, what would I know, but I suspect that when the whim is utterly spontaneous and cannot be compelled, and in a sense is completely unmotivated, that's my understanding of it. At the same time, I bet it happens when the person's karma has reached the perfect balance of elements and is ready for it.
One example I think of is the poet-composer Simab, the Urdu composer of ghazals. Baba used to love that music and that poetry. At one time, at Guru Prasad, one of Simab's ghazals, Abu Kya Batahume Tere, was being performed before Baba. I don't remember the translation, but it was so profound. At one point, Baba said,
he cut it off in the middle.
Stop the music. Wherever Simab is at this moment, I give him liberation.
That's what I would call a successful ghazal.
That is a way to win grace. That is a way to win grace.
I was just thinking about Baba saying, I know what you'll be thinking in 1,000 years, and if I'm going to give you miracles, it's kind of in the divine plan already. Why would I change a plan that I've already made that's already perfect? So miracles, the way I understand it, and grace has been planned into the soul already by the infinite intelligence long before these lifetimes even came. It was known by the master, the Godhead, that this person in this lifetime will receive this miracle, and it will seem like this, but it's all known.
It's true. For most people who were around Baba, there were just a few people who wanted to get it over with quickly and get realization. Pleader was one of them. And Baba's answer was, well, you're here with me now. There's all this work. You could take part. Why do you want to scram? You're done then. So the Mondoli never cared about all of these things. To them it was inevitable. They weren't concerned about all these things. It was inevitable. Yes?
There were times when Baba would say, I'm in the mood for, I'm in the mood to someone and to give something. Might that be connected with grace, a tinge of grace, a touch?
Yeah, that's
It
Leela.
sounds like it,
That's
yeah.
Leela. Leela is the whim. Leela is the good word for it. Grace depends on Leela. Yes?
Many of us have read The Effort of Grace by Darwin, and a wonderful book. The very title implies that if we put, and Darwin even seems to say it between the lines, that if we put in the right kind of effort at the right time, then the grace may follow, but not necessarily. And I'm always wondering, what would that be? And he implies that if you think about your own reactions, that you can gradually uncover the source or the root of some of your samskaras in this life. That so with enough introspection, he seems to be implying that we can maybe uproot some of the things that brought us back and maybe lighten our load.
Yeah, it's a long journey and effort. Baba always stressed effort. He stressed effort with people. It's the nature of the mind to think, I'm going to make some effort and then therefore I should be paid a dividend. But it's just the opposite with the spiritual path. There's no expectation. So for those people who are close to him, they didn't have any expectations. Their great thrill was to be with him. Didn't matter after that. So.
Yeah, it seems to me like the effort one makes or the service one renders, to talk about it in terms of the interplay of the lover and the beloved, especially if it is done without any intention or motive, it's almost like tempting the beloved to give his grace. But when it happens, like what you were saying, it's destined 1,000,000 years beforehand when that grace will fall. But yet, the paradox is, and I think, that when it happens, it is utterly spontaneous and unmotivated and unplanned. Both of those are true.
Now, there was one end to, was that Christina's question about grace? There was one end to that, and that is now, so if you're in frustration, so what are we supposed to do then? We just wait? We're not going to win a lottery? What is this thing? What do we do? So Baba stressed 3 important things all through the years, and he repeated this from time to time. To free yourself from this illusion, you must do 3 things. 1, take my name. Develop the habit of taking my name. 2, keep my remembrance. And 3, love me then. So they developed. If you don't think you're remembering Baba enough, develop the habit of repeating his name, then you remember him more. By remembering him more, you can't help but be in a transactional love situation with him. So, that's it. Take my name, keep my remembrance, and love me. And he said, this will win you God. Not yoga this and meditate. Do those 3 simple things.
You know, even in Buddhism, an idea like grace began to appear and take over. Most of us in the West are acquainted with things like Zen, but the most popular forms of Buddhism are actually devotional Buddhism, a kind of a bhakti Buddhism, you could call it. I don't remember the names of the people who said this, but there was some Buddhist sage who was saying, if even the worst of sinners can achieve the Western paradise, how much more so can a great servant and saint? And then the next generation, someone else said, if even saints can attain the Western paradise, how much more so can the worst of sinners? In other words, the idea is your actions are of no avail to getting there. It is purely the grace of the Buddha who does it. So it's kind of a paradoxical and exaggerated statement of the case, obviously, but the point is dependence entirely on the grace of the beloved. But that does not preclude trying. We all know this. We know we have to work hard. Nobody is really deceived.
Just a little follow-up to Wilson's comment about bodhisattva and those who might linger in the mental world. Because you have to get to the mental world, one has to be in the mental world before, usually, generally, before realization. It's the path. There is, as Bob explained, very interesting feature: objective experience of the mental world and subjective experience of the mental world. The yogis and those persons who advance through techniques experience the mental world objectively. The musts, on the other hand, who have lost themselves in love for God, live in that world all the time, without a break. They have subjective experience of the mental world. If anybody wants to linger, it wouldn't be a must. They're just lost. And Baba has explained the spiritual path in these general terms for everybody who thinks it's just bliss. There's also agony there. The subtle world he describes as divine hallucination. And the mental world, a spiritual nightmare of longing for God. Generally, people don't want to linger there. You've come that far and you're standing at the great abyss which is impossible to cross. And we know this because of examples of those very high people who were associated with Bob and begged him to end it all for them. Please, it's enough now. I remember the story of one saint in Dehradun. When Bob was in Dehradun in 1953, he would contact or have the Mandali contact different saints. There were saints up there. There was one saint, Mangat Ram, who was in the sixth plane, and I think Baba may have gone there incognito with the Mandali one day, and then he sent the Mandali back the next day or 2 days later and said, "Tell them you're from me. Tell them you're from Meher Baba. You can say my name." So the few that he sent back there, he looked at them, nodded. They informed him, "We are from Meher Baba." He said, "Yes, I know. Tell him to do something. This is enough now with this world." So they got back. Bob said, "So you saw him? What did he say?" They told him the saint's comments. You see how bad it is in the world in this age? Even the saints are disgusted with things. This one apparently was so disgusted that not a year later he dropped his body. Just get out of there, just forget it. And he wasn't very old. It's an example what they have to go through.
Here's a question for you. Baba said that Hitler was my agent. Can you tell us why he said that and possibly expand on the circumstances or what that means?
Do you want to say anything?
I don't have all that much to say.
All right. You know, Baba's general statement, he gave so many explanations during World War II because of the conditions of the world. What he said was, all these world leaders are nothing but puppets in the hands of the perfect masters. All playing out a drama for the greater benefit of humanity in the long term. Short-term destruction, long-term benefit. Baba's comments about Hitler were, he played his role perfectly to the end. This gives people an idea that all this is beyond good and evil. This whole subject of good and evil. In shallow religious interpretation, it's all about good and evil, and there's a devil that's the opposite of God. And Baba says that's all bogus. That's not the way things are. These are abstractions. Everything is in God. God is infinite, and God, there is only God ultimately. So these are all abstractions. But they each had a role to play, and he made different comments about world leaders at the time. But he said that Hitler had conviction about what he was doing. So an interesting thing he said is that in that way, because Hitler had honest conviction about what he was doing, he had immunity to contracting so many scars from these people. He was a psychopath in that sense, as opposed to a sociopath who didn't care anyway. He thought he was doing well. So it was an interesting comment that Bob made. But in order to be a Hitler, Bob explained, it takes lifetimes upon lifetimes of an overabundance of good sanskars to be able to attract that role as an opposite. It takes the perfect masters ages upon ages to make these special characters to play these roles. Because they also are archetypes in a sense. Not in the sense of being members of a circle, but in the broader sense of what has to happen in the divine plan. So they have to play these roles. Sometimes these great world characters become part of the avatar circle. We know that in the sense of Baba saying, for an example, Vishnu, one of his inner 12, was Napoleon. And that Khorshid was Queen Victoria. And all these connections. They played these roles. At that time, they're already in the circle, though it's not the time of the Advent. So whatever they do, they're not taking on new sanskars. So if people think Napoleon was an arrogant megalomaniac, could be true in a worldly sense, but he could not contract new sanskars because he was in the avatar circle, taking that position. And we know that because if he was in the first circle after Muhammad all got realization within 200 years of Muhammad dropping his body. So immediately that progression for the next circle is beginning. Those persons have to take their places. And they have that immunity. Baba explained, they have that immunity to gaining new sanskars. They are immune from the law of karma.
I do remember Arnavas, she said this a whole bunch of times, but the time I most remember was not too long before she passed away, but she was very, very clear and very coherent. And she was saying, I remember Baba saying this. She was very definite about it, that the 6 great leaders from World War II, that would be Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and then I always forget who it is from Japan. But anyway, all of them, here's what she said, Baba said this, she was completely definite, were a 6th plane. So maybe they were functioning on that level or being used on that level or something like that. But she most certainly said that, and she was very definite. I remember Baba saying this.
That doesn't mean they had consciousness of it. They would have been veiled.
They could have been puppets.
Their status.
Because for a character to play such a huge role in world history, where millions and millions of people are so spectacularly affected, it would have to be a most unusual soul to be suited to that.
In the Hindu lore, the story in the time of the advent of Ram, Ravana, who was the great demon king, in his previous lifetimes as a yogi, struggling, making efforts, was given an opportunity. You can have realization in so many more lifetimes continuing what you're doing, or you can have realization after one lifetime if you play this fiend. He said, I'll do the fiend. And he was Ravana, who was the nemesis of Ram. This is the story. It gives you an example of being beyond good and evil.
Around 1970, Adi Kearani said that Mara was always the same soul, returning as the avatar's consort, unlike the other Mandali who have the same office but are not the same souls coming again. Could you comment on that?
We've heard this before. A lot of this is a different interpretation. But we have to go what has been published. This is a clarification that Baba has given in 1955 because these issues came up in those years. And Phyllis Frederick, who's publishing The Awakener, had asked Baba these questions about the Avatar Circle. So Mani took down dictation in April 1955 at Satara for this discourse. And it is one of the great explanations we have, although it is not everything. I'll just read a little bit of this so that we might get a better understanding of Baba's explanation for this. With every advent of the Avatar on earth, the 12 men of the inner circle and its appendage of 2 women gather around the personality of the Avatar as the self-same 14 types of individualities. These 14 different individualities in the shape of different personalities always occupy their respective offices whenever the Avatar manifests on earth. And during and after the lifespan of the Avatar, they, individually and collectively, function in the same way as their predecessors, who had held and functioned in the same offices of the inner circle during the past advents of the Avatar. Therefore, it would not be wrong to say that with Christ coming again, come Peter, Judas, and all his apostles. But this can never mean that the very same Peter or the self-same Judas reincarnates again and again. These can never reincarnate, as all of the individual personalities of the Avatar's inner circle attain God realization in every Avatar period, either during or soon after the lifespan of the Avatar. Once God realization is attained, reincarnation is impossible. The only exception to this rule is the Avatar himself, who comes again and again to redeem humanity. It is not the same individualized personalities of the inner circle that reincarnate. It is the individualities of their particular offices that come with every advent of the Avatar. It is because in all the Avatars' advents, each of the 12 men and the 2 women of the inner circle hold exactly the same office and function in exactly the same manner that it is said the Avatar always brings with him the same circle. As soon as the veil with which the Avatar descends on earth is rent by the then living perfect masters, and the Avatar realizes his avatarhood, the 12 men and 2 women automatically group around the personality of the Avatar to occupy their respective positions in the inner circle and to function as usual according to the dictates of the Avatar of the age. This brings up a very important point that is not often discussed. In this discourse itself, Baba has made 2 comments that I could explain how people come to occupy these offices, but it would take volumes. Or I could explain something else, but it would take volumes. So one of the relevant issues here, is that these offices are the things that always come with the Avatar. We'll call them offices. That's a very dispassionate name. These positions in the circle come with the Avatar whenever he comes. They have to be filled. And the people who fill these circles are people who have earned the right for God realization, he explains. Most important is the one who plays the direct opposite, the Mara. That position is as old as the ancient one. Every soul in creation today, before they were born into creation, all these positions in the Avatar with him were ancient. So in one sense, these positions are much more important than any soul. because they allow him to access humanity and creation through themselves. They have earned that right to be the instruments. That's a very important thing. That the positions themselves are crucial. Crucial. They always have to be the same. Now, Ward and I were talking. Ward has rewritten a discourse that was given to Elizabeth Patterson in 1933 concerning the circle and some of these points that you will find nowhere else. And Ward has written something that has been published about this.
Yeah, 2011 in the Glow. I just looked it up.
There are some really fascinating points in there. And one of these points is that when the original soul, okay, first of all, to think of a beginningless beginning is beyond our comprehension. But when that first soul into creation developed through the myriad of forms, developing consciousness, there was a twin soul that accompanied him. So that duality and opposition could play off of it. And this is the one who is the position of the consort. The twin soul, the direct opposite.
Yeah, those, Baba says, 2 drops, and they emerge from the very beginning. The very first emergence of that drop that then became the avatar.
So,
and he also says that first drop winds up bringing with him the whole 120 who subsequently become the circles of the avatar. I don't think at that stage Baba had explained the avatar has circles of 120, but it's there. It's got to be the strangest discourse of Baba's I've ever read. But I got the source of it from both the handwritten account and typed account from Elizabeth Patterson, who is notable for her sanity. She was not the one to invent something of her own, so it's quite reliable, I would say.
Not beyond God's understanding, but beyond our understanding.
Yeah, Mara was publicly visible on Baba's birthday celebration in 1926, and that was it. After that, she completely was withdrawn from the view of almost all men, with a few rare exceptions, until, as you say, January 31st, 1968. I remember I was very suspicious of Erich. So I asked him one time, Erich, have you ever seen Mara? And, you know, he was through the whole new life with Baba, etc. But I remember Lakshman, you know, the Erich of Ram's advent, was in exile with Ram, Sita, and himself for, 14 years, and he never looked above her ankles. So he never saw her the whole time. And I asked myself, is Erich capable of that? And the obvious answer was, yes, he certainly is. He'd be perfectly capable of never looking. So even though she came into the Sunday programs, I always noticed he never looked that way.
We always watched, and there. So
never
as soon
once.
as the women would come in, Erich would.
So I asked, have you ever seen Mara? Very subtly avoided my question by saying, she comes in to the program every Sunday. And you notice he didn't say, I look. So I noticed that. So I said, oh, no. Oh, did you ever speak to her? He was trying to avoid the question. And he said, oh, of course. Well, when did he speak to her? On January 31st, 1968, he said, Jai Baba Mara.
She spoke to them. That's the important thing.
That's right.
That's the key to this all.
So that was the first time he had ever spoken to her. I bet she to him. And I bet it was the first time he ever saw her, to tell the truth. I bet he never looked once. These are not ordinary souls.
No.
By the way, I did once reading much about the Prophet Muhammad, and I had been wondering who, you know, the Peter role, Baba very explicitly said that was Erich. And I was wondering who it was with Muhammad. And people say Ali, but I had always thought it might be Abu Bakr. So I asked Erich, and he said, oh, it was Ali. And I said, it wasn't Abu Bakr? And he said, no, it was Ali. And so you might say, well, how would he know? Well, I don't know, but since he had the job this time, it seems to me to carry weight.
Remember, Jean had asked that question. I remember she had asked that before, where she had heard that Baba said that Mara didn't have to have God realization. So that was in context of the question of Mara always coming back.
Yeah.
What Baba said is Mara does not have to live the life of God. She doesn't have to be God realized and live again, because her life as Mara is so great. Even that perfect life wouldn't be something she needed more than that. So she got God realization upon death, we assume, according to Baba's explanations, but she won't have to come back and live the life of God as a God-realized person. That's the difference.
Baba said that when a perfect master drops his body, he leaves the illusory world behind and has no further contact with it. But what about the avatar? Is Mayor Baba still out there somewhere? Is he within us, guiding us? Is he around in the creation, or did he take off and leave the illusion behind like a perfect master does, according to Baba?
Remember in 1958 when the book Life at its Best came out and Baba gave that great little message. Life is a jest, but unfortunately the jest is on my chest. And in this great long story of the Ancient One, Baba has explained through the years how being the first to realize God, the burden came on him eternally. And as he states in the Discourse with the Circle, all those who experience God realization are then finished. Baba gave a great message in the 60s later, a chart called The Four Journeys, where he explained more in depth about what happens after God realization and divinity and the perfect masters and what happens. And so the fourth journey is the final journey for perfect masters, where they go into that original state of God realization without consciousness of creation. Baba uses this term, which is really an excellent term. It's also a term we'll find in Beam. Eternal, avataric, infinite consciousness. Eternal, avataric, infinite consciousness. Not just infinite consciousness, we say God is infinite consciousness. Eternal, avataric, infinite consciousness. Eternal responsibility for creation. And I always think of that expression Bob had. He would tell people from time to time, I never leave. He told Darwin, isn't it wonderful? I never leave. Wonderful for us, not for him maybe. Don't know. Yes, and that's the difference between Bob and every other perfect master. A great difference is that he has eternal responsibility and he can be the eternal master at any time. We have proof of this by different devoted people through different advents. St. Francis of Assisi is a great example. Somebody asked the question, I don't know if you're going to get to it, about a living master. And Baba said, a living master. Well, where was the master of St. Francis of Assisi? We know he did go to the east. Maybe he contacted somebody there. Yes?
Shooter, the green saint, Baba said.
Khizr.
In creation and its causes, Baba actually says he had a Hindu perfect master. So I don't know how to reconcile that. I don't know, do Hindu perfect masters and Khizr get along? Across the religious divide. Khizr is a very famous Islamic personality.
All of these are embodiments of divinity to facilitate the divine plan. In Vedanta is
Dattatreya.
Same as Khizr in Sufi terminology.
And Baba said that his influences, the avatar, will be most profound for some period of time. 100 years, Something like that.
It's as if he were still in the body for 100 years, or for 200 years in those cases where he's coming back after 1400 years. Eric would say this all the time. I always think one way of, theoretically conceptualizing the avatar and his eternal aspect, Baba didn't exactly say this, but comes to me, it's like that 10th state of God. The 10th state of God is common to the avatar and the perfect masters. I don't know how many of you are well acquainted with it, but there's a whole diagram of it. But I think of him as the eternal 10th state of God. He is always there. In the 10th state of God, God is conscious of self with a capital S and infinitely conscious of all the creation. So I almost think of him, when the perfect masters are there, he's fully there with them also. There would be another point, if we ever got into this in depth, what I would bring up from the appendix to God Speaks. Baba's lovers will never accept that he's not here. It's not an acceptable conclusion. The lover will say, no,
Well,
I don't buy it.
There are too many people with subjective experiences that
Yeah.
to them, we have proof of it. So he's not some dead guy. No.
In the Nothing and the Everything, Val's book, he talks about the mischievous chicken, and it's spelled Saitan, S-A-I-T-A-N, according to this question that was sent to me. And we have the English Satan, and they're almost very similar words in Arabic. So there's that mischievous chicken. Is the mischievous chicken something like Satan, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
The second part of the question is, there's also a reference to gas, a companion gas that deceives the chicken.
Find that.
So, does God have gas? And what is this companion gas?
That's it. Mischievous chicken is a great allegory. Allegories are used by the masters to teach people, simplify complex things into a more understandable fashion. Mischievous chicken is a great thing. Now, here's another question of words and lexicon. If you use the word Satan in the Western thing, it's immediately people go, ah! It reminds me of Dana Carvey, who had that church lady, you know, and he didn't like Santa because it could easily be transferred into Satan. But the Hindi term is Saitan, Saitan Murgi Ka Bacha, which means mischievous chicken son. Mischievous chicken son. Mischievous means curious and not above doing something to find out what's happening. It doesn't mean essential evil in the universe that wants to send us all to hell. No, it doesn't mean that. Nothing like that.
The usual Islamic term for that would be Iblis, actually.
Yes. But again, all of this, it's not a question of evil and good, they're abstractions. This is part of the ongoing play of creation. That question about this gas is explained earlier in the allegory, and it reads like this. First of all, this is the book, Nothing and the Everything, written by Bhau who gives the expanded version of the story Mischievous Chicken like the best you'll ever find. It is really good. A simple story. He's telling the story about the chicken daring to look out from underneath the mother hen's wings. The mother hen is, original God. He's looking out, he looks up once, he's scared, comes back. Every time he looks out, so there's changes, and eventually he starts seeing colors and then no colors, and then he goes out on the seventh time. But as he's out, there are flames and there are gases, because creation, that clash between prana and akash has occurred. The Big Bang has occurred, and now that experience is there. So we're getting back to the term Chaitanya. This is how it is explained here. The mischievous chicken had to tear at these layers of flames and gas, trying to penetrate them in order to see them clearly. But when he put his head up for the seventh time, the gas became his companion and no longer hindered him. In actuality, the fire transformed into gas, and that gas became energy, Chaitanya. The gas gave him the energy to proceed further. So on the seventh time out, the chicken felt like venturing on, and he would have, but suddenly he discovered that he was hungry. This hunger and the need to satisfy it brought about his 14 adventures. Insatiable hunger propelled him, forced him, urged him, all through evolution and involution. The insatiable hunger for knowledge, the intelligence to know, who am I? Chaitanya is the companion. The first time I'm aware of that Baba had actually drawn the figure of the mischievous chicken was in 1926 at one of the teas. Thursday teas. And he gave a lottery to all the Mandali, who's going to win the drawing. And Vishnu won the mischievous chicken.
Did he keep it?
Maybe it's in the archives.
Maybe so.
We don't have it in Weaverville, no.
Very last paragraph of God Speaks brings up the astral body and how it gets confused, how people get,
Yes.
Could you expand on that?
Yes, that's a good topic. We're discussing what happens after death. We talked about suicide. But let's discuss what happens after the ordinary death. Death of the ordinary person. Bob has explained this in depth in certain places. There is an attachment to the physical body, and so this connection goes on for 3 to 4 days before that attachment to the physical form is broken. In the meantime, what happens is that the person goes through a life review. Baba has stated that there is no decrease in consciousness after death in any way. So consciousness now shifts into the new afterlife world. We call it afterlife. This is, speaking of misnomers, this question is a misnomer. Is there life after death? It's not a question of life. It's a question of existence. There is always existence. Life is just a little episode. The real illusion is the gross world. That's the depth of illusion. There is less illusion after the physical body is gone. So now getting back to the life review, the purpose of the life review is that the person has to go through all experiences in their lives and balance good and bad to certain degrees, and go through all of those reviews. And now there's no lawyer to defend you. There's no rationalization, because every person knows within themselves, they know the truth, what it was and how that other person, now you experience how that other person would feel for whatever you may have done. So this goes on and on. Eventually there's a point. Now the Hindus say about 10 days. They give it, it's just a general term, 10 days. It may be more or less depending on the length of the life and the person's activity and all of that. But when there is a point reached where the summation is there, there's either an overabundance of good or bad sanskars. And depending upon that overabundance, there is a condition, a state of heaven or hell that has to be experienced. So the intensity of the heaven or hell is dependent upon the strength of the sanskars. So if you have an overabundance and it's very intense of one way or another, that experience of heaven or hell is there. And Baba, in the early days, had said, basically, the experience of heaven or hell is about tenfold of what you've experienced on earth. So if you have bad sense scars and you have to experience the bad side of that, it's going to be tenfold, and that's your hell. Same thing with heaven. It's going to be tenfold, and that's your heaven. But of course, the goal is not heaven and hell. It's just an intermediate state. Right there, until those sense scars in the astral. Now the person has an astral body. An ordinary person has an astral body, which is in the semi-subtle experience, to go through these experiences of heaven or hell. When those sense scars become more subtle, more worn out, there's no purpose for the astral body anymore, and it is destroyed, disintegrates. So now what's left? The spirit is still there. The spirit is the soul dressed in the mind and energy, the mind with its sense scars. It's still all there, but there has been an adjustment. That life has been lived, and the experience of heaven or hell has evened out those impressions. And now the person, what happens next is a reformation of the subtle form, subtle body, to adjust to the recent heaven and hell experience. So the subtle body is not born and dies in that sense. It readjusts, it reforms, it changes. It's a reformation. And now after that period, that readjustment, the person is ready for reincarnation again, though they may not have a suitable opportunity, or maybe the time isn't right. So then there's that, Baba referred to it as the antechamber before birth, where the souls wait. There are other things that have to be done and things that can be done. That is the experience of the average person. The spiritually advanced persons don't have an astral body. They're beyond the gross, and they're directly into their subtle conscious. They go to the subtle world and do their reformations there, whatever it is in between. And for the mental conscious soul, there's hardly any difference in their state. Doesn't mean much. When the time is right, they'll take a birth again. That's all. To do the work they need to do. That's what happens.
Baba did characterize the astral body as a sheath between the subtle sphere and the gross. In the early years, Baba used the word astral differently, so this may give rise to a certain confusion. He would often use the word astral to mean subtle. So you'll see that in Tiffin lectures or Creation and Its Causes. But as time went on, he gave greater definition and precision to his terminology, and he came to use it to refer specifically to the sheath. For example, astral projection is accomplished through that sheath. Baba himself did not make this connection, but in one of the appendices to God Speaks, he talks about the composite sphere. I don't know if any of you have ever delved into that. And he said, it's the most discussed and least understood. Well, it's the least understood because that's the only place where it comes up, and I'll be damned if I can understand it there. But he says, it's not a single sphere, it's actually three, it's almost like liminal zones between God and the mental sphere. There are 7 layers. Between the mental sphere and the subtle sphere, there are 7 layers. And between the subtle sphere and the gross sphere, there are 7 layers. And elsewhere, Baba has said the astral has 7 layers. So I suspect it has something to do with the composite sphere. And apparently the composite sphere is crucial. If it disappeared, the whole universe would disappear. But as Peter said, you keep it after death until you've finished your experiences of the heaven and hell state, and then it's lost. But when you reincarnate, you get a new astral sheath. So we all have one, except for
With
those
the new
of
gross body comes the new
astral body. Except for those of you on the 4th, 5th, 6th planes, which have gone beyond the need for that.
Yes.
So the reincarnation reincarnation isn't like as soon as you balance that out, then you're reincarnated. Like,
Not necessarily reincarnated, but you're ready. The readiness is important to happen first. Some people have a quick reincarnation, and it depends upon, Baba has explained the two different things. In the cases of where you see children who die under the age of 7, and it's so tragic to us when we see that happen, but Baba has explained that these are generally lingering impressions from a past life that was cut short. And so they have to be spent. And they just live the life of an innocent child and they die in that childhood. But it's good for the person to go through that because they have not gained any new impressions in that lifetime. They've just cleaned up old stuff and now they really have a fresh start for their next birth. This is harder for people who are exposed to that and have attachment to those children.
It's kind of nice to hear that, though, because it's not a misfortune for them at all.
And as we know, Bob explained, the conditions for reincarnation are not always that simple. Persons who die in an accident suddenly are shocked and they may linger in the growths for a longer period because of that shock. But if they're not bad-natured people, they don't bother anybody. However, somebody who is a bad person, who has their life cut short, and is attached to the gross world can bother people and even cause harm. Ghosts can harm people. It's rare. They can do it. Mostly the harm is in the form of scaring people.
ghosts.
As ghosts.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you. We've reached the end of our time, but I do have one more question that has come in. Is it true that Ward Parks once had Baba's secret book? But he absent-mindedly threw it in the loony.
I didn't mean to.
Now we know. Thank you, Ward and Peter.
Jai Baba, everybody.